appreciate that. We know that it's transition day and a lot of people are going in and out. But let me introduce myself. I'm Brenda Barr. I, until 3 weeks ago, worked for a company named MAC that made educational media products. Now I work for ClickView. And what we're going to talk about today is a project that a lot of us did together, just so you guys know a little bit about me. Teacher, administrator, curriculum coordinator, worked at National Geographic for about a decade, and now I work at ClickView. And I get to do a lot of great things and work with these amazing people who are up on the panel. So my big portion of today is to ask questions. So that'll be the big time for us. But we're glad you're here, and we're going to talk a little bit about something that we refer to as classparts. And this is a project that we all worked on together. And instead of me trying to give you a whole lot of information about classparts, I'm going to show you. But it basically comes down to how can we use historic places to support educators in a rapidly changing educational landscape. And we know that there's a lot of there's a lot of test stress, all kinds of things that are going on in school districts, but we hope that ClassPart will help address some of those things, and we'll ask some more questions about it. So let's see what it's all about. And I'll keep pressing until eventually it plays.
Welcome to Ford's Theater, standing witness to history in downtown Washington for over 160 years. In Module 1, we will examine the impact and legacy of Lincoln and Ford's Theater. Then, in Module 2, we will hear from experts and experienced educators focusing on practical classroom strategies.
Welcome to George Washington's Mount Vernon, home of the first President of the United States of America.
When students read a primary source closely, they're not just learning about history, they're stepping into it.
This is the coat that George Washington was wearing when he was inaugurated as the first president of the United States.
We want you to feel inspired by the events of Washington's life, his character, and his leadership.
Williamsburg was once the bustling capital of Virginia, the largest and most influential colony, playing a key role in forming what would become the United States of America. We explore how people lived in colonial Virginia and Williamsburg, their role in the Revolution, and how Williamsburg's preservation today offers a window into the past, exploring history through place, primary sources, and lived experiences.
Welcome to Advice to My Country, a course that explores the roots of the Republic and the essential role Virginia and Williamsburg played in shaping it.
So, welcome again to Ford Theater, and welcome to ClassPart.
Welcome to ClassPart.
Welcome to ClassPart.
Welcome to ClassPart.
So that's a little bit of a taste of the 4 courses that we have created, and we're continually creating those for educators through partnerships with institutions, highly vetted museums. Our company, as well as Driving Force Institute, contributed to the making of this, and it's for teachers' professional development. But there's also a great deal that could be used in the classroom for students as well. And I'm going to take just a second to let these guys, each one of them is going to introduce themselves, and they've all got a question, and then we're going to have hopefully some questions from you guys about ClassPart. So we're going to start with Alyssa Oginski from George Washington's Mount Vernon.
Yes, hello. Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Alyssa Oginski. I'm the Director of K-12 Education at George Washington's Mount Vernon, and that just means my team and I have the special honor of working every day to try and support teachers and students in their classrooms. A lot of outreach. I'll focus on teacher PD today. We do create resources, this being one of them, our newest. But our teacher professional development programs are in person as part of the George Washington Teacher Institute. This year for America 250, we are going around the country. We have 50 or more programs in different states, so be on the lookout for that. But before we even started on that big initiative for 50 plus programs, I say it multiple times because I'm still trying to convince myself how we're doing all of that. But we realized that the professional development that we put on at the estate, the in-person PD, is not accessible to every teacher, right? There are barriers, whether that's I work a part-time job and I need that for extra income, I can't come there for PD, or I can't come to the state where you're hosting that or that town. I might be a caretaker for someone close to me. I might have my own health reasons why I can't come. So a very long time, we've known about these access barriers. Now COVID presented this opportunity for us to be able to reach teachers who couldn't necessarily come to Mount Vernon. But unlike COVID, this project allowed us to do it proactively, intentionally, without the panic situation. We were all in, sorry to talk about the dark times, but you know, it was an easy yes for us to get into this work. It is solving, hopefully, a problem of those barriers to access to our programs. And you get the same access to the scholars we invite to the estate for Teacher PD, our estate experts, like you saw Adam, our curator, with the collections. You get a look and a close read of those primary sources like documents and objects, even place. There's a portion of our video where we look at George Washington's study and the objects within it and how you can learn from place. We're all about place-based learning. But jumping back to COVID to try to answer the question of what are teachers facing now, you know, being classroom adjacent and working with such a large population of teachers from all over the country the last, you know, it's been 6 years since COVID, so we'll just use that as a kind of pinpoint. We are aware, very aware of, you know, teachers trying to totally change their methodology in living through and teaching in a global pandemic. And then the fallout afterwards of the social, emotional disruptions from students or within themselves going back to the classroom. Achievement gaps, historic social justice movements happening in real time, historic moments like January 6th amongst 500 other things. And the teachers have been doing this all in this age of social media and disinformation and AI. So again, if we can create a resource that makes a teacher's life even just a smidge easier, we're gonna try to do that. Like if we can't say yes, a teacher might need this, then we hopefully are not doing that. You know, teachers have also, in addition to all those challenges, been public targets throughout the whole thing. We had, what do we have? I can't name them all. You guys shout out if you need to. Critical race theory, new state legislation and curriculum changes, book banning, dismantling of the Department of Education, policies to, restore truth and sanity to American history. So there's so many things that teachers and the pressures that they're under, again, even though it's a bit of work on our end to make sure these types of resources are available, we want to do that. I do like to always address too, when I'm talking to new people, you know, the mission of Mount Vernon is to centralize Washington's life and legacy. And some of the policies I'm referencing would maybe ask us to not cover the full history of George Washington. And we're not about that. You know, his life and legacies include great leadership moments that contributed to the founding of this country, the good parts of it. And then there's the duality piece of him where the other parts are that he held human beings in bondage and denied them of agency and humanity, hundreds. So we don't shy away from that. We hope that Mount Vernon can be a model for teachers who are facing struggles in the classroom to have those conversations, or maybe their classroom is perceived as divisive, to say, well, Mount Vernon's talking about it, right? We want to look at Washington's leadership from the lens of the things we can champion him for and not. And hopefully that leads to more conversations about leadership and historical figures and a teacher's leadership and so forth. So, sorry. There's a lot to say about.
There's a lot of pressure out there. I'm hearing a lot of pressure out there. I heard a sentence yesterday that I thought was really poignant for what we're trying to do through Classic Art, which is widen the aperture of opportunity. And I think that's great. There are a lot of new teachers, a lot of veteran teachers, people who are looking for a little pick-me-up in their class, but they're also looking for trusted, curated materials. So our next guest on the panel is Trisha Patrick from Ford's Theater, and she was our first.
Hi everyone, my name is Trisha Patrick. I'm the Irani Foundation Director of Education at Ford's Theater. At Ford's Theater, our mission is to explore the legacy of Abraham Lincoln and celebrate the American experience through theater and through education. We do that in a couple of different ways, of course. We are a museum, so the historic site is owned and operated by the National Park Service. Ford's Theater Society is a 501c3 not-for-profit, and we produce 3 plays a season in addition to education and public programming. We also, of course, continue to interpret the history of the Civil War, Lincoln, the assassination, of course, through additional exhibits that we have across the street as folks transition from the historic site over to the Peterson House and continue to learn about the aftermath, the trial, and then the living legacy of Abraham Lincoln.
Will you remind us what the Peterson House is?
Sorry, the Peterson House is the house directly across the street where after Lincoln was shot, it was too far, or the doctors thought it was too far to carry him back to the White House because of the condition that he was in. And a resident of the Peterson House saw what was happening and said, bring him, not quite quoting, but bring him over here. And then he was brought into the back of the house, into one of the tenants' bedrooms, and died the next morning there. So that is the Peterson House, and it's part of our multi-building campus, if you will. I do want to talk about my first experience walking into Ford's Theater. So my background is in theater, and I remember stepping into the space for the very first time, and I must admit that it took me a little bit off guard. I was not expecting to be affected as much by the power of police. I was like, I've been in theaters before. This is just another one of those. Absolutely not. I was a little bit of my breath was taken away. It was the red velvet of the seats, the amber of the lights, the grandeur of the space, and of course you look up to the presidential box and you see how it's lit, and you just cannot help but be connected to this particular moment in history, and just imagine, if you can, what it was like to be there on that night and subsequent nights as well. One of the ways in which we, of course, continue to celebrate and acknowledge Lincoln's legacy is through the love of theater. And that's why we continue to produce plays these days, and we're happy that it is such an active place for creativity as well. As much as we would love for every single person who's on American soil to walk through our doors, we know that it's not possible. So through this endeavor, we are hoping the ways in which we have captured cinematically the place, the ways in which we have integrated the stories of teachers, the ways in which we have crafted the narrative of that story and what a story that it is, that we are able to connect with viewers and have them feel like they are a part of that story with us, that they are a part of the journey as well. And that's what we're really hoping to do with this endeavor. The other thing that we're hoping to do is we also recognize that educators have a finite amount of time in your curriculum to talk about the Civil War and even less time to talk about Lincoln and the assassination. So one of the things through the additional resources that are available, as well as through the content, we're hoping that you find other connections and intersections between Lincoln's story and the overarching story of the evolution of the American experience, right? So when you're looking at the different parts, whether it's leadership, whether it's policy, whether it's how he built his cabinet and how they were activated and engaged afterwards, that whether it's through his words, the speeches, and oratory, that there are other ways in which we hope that you can insert Lincoln into your content beyond the assassination story. So that's one of the ways in which we're hoping to reach new teachers and, of course, reach new students as well.
And we had a great time working with Forge because we really wanted to lean into more than the one sentence in most textbooks, and then he was assassinated.
Right.
And so we really went into the coup and the overthrow and who was killed. We did a minute-by-minute timeline for it. We've done student videos to accompany this. So we really tried to take it from what would a civics teacher do? What would a history teacher do? So and theater teacher and oratory, we did a lot of work with them. And then our last panelist, all the way from Colonial Williamsburg, is man Nagawiki, and I'll get it right. And you can answer your question, introduce yourself, and we're excited you're here too.
Oh, thanks, Brenda. Hi, everybody. Excited to be here with Mark. So I'm Mia Nagawiki. I'm the Senior Vice President for Education at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. And it's been a really interesting few years. I don't need to tell all of you that. I've been at CW, excuse me, as we call it, for 3.5 years. And before I dive into this question, sort of a little bit about me and how my work history has informed what we're doing with ClickView and Makematic and at Colonial Williamsburg with our partners. So my first boss is in the room, which was a complete surprise. There's Adrienne Kupfer, she was my first boss at the New York Historical Society. I worked at New York Historical for 13 years. And while I was there, I conceived of and launched a digital learning platform called Women in the American Story, which was conceived and continues to exist to provide classroom teachers with sources about American women that they can use across the full sweep of US history. Only 13% of historical figures in textbooks are women, but women have always been half the population. So we designed and built, we call it WHAMS for short, WHAMS, and we launched it in early 2017. So we were building it in one sort of political context, and then it launched in a totally different one. And we were nervous about that and how it would be received and how the extent to which teachers would feel comfortable using it, because not only is it all about women's history and women's stories, but it also prioritizes intersectionality. So women of every type and background from all over what would become the United States, who had all kinds of experiences, sexual orientations, everything. And it was and is a huge success, and I think that's for two reasons. One, we built it not because I thought it was a good idea, but because teachers had been asking us for years for more material on women's history. So we built something that they were explicitly asking for, and therefore it was received more openly. And secondly, that project is built and based on primary sources. So it's about the stuff of history, then packaged in a way that's relevant and approachable for a K-12 audience. I went from New York Historical to the Center for Civic Education, which is one of our nation's oldest civic education organizations, really dove into the world of constitutional history, civics education. And then I got the call from Colonial Williamsburg, and it made me realize that museums and the power of place is where that's really my love language. And Colonial Williamsburg is a unique place in a lot of ways, and it's a place where we can really do place-based history learning and civics. I will admit that I didn't know a lot about this when I got there, so I'll give you a little background. Colonial Williamsburg is the largest U.S. history museum in the world. It's the largest living history museum in the world. It is the reconstructed capital of Williamsburg, Virginia, which was the capital of colonial Virginia until partway through the Revolution, which means historical figures whose names we all know walked these streets, stayed in these taverns, debated the formative ideas that became the American experiment in the House of Burgesses. I get goosebumps when I talk about it. It's like they were literally there. And it is an entire town. It's an entire community. And in the Revolution, Williamsburg was 50% black, and most of those people were enslaved. It was also a place where indigenous people and indigenous nations came frequently to conduct business, to conduct diplomacy, to do trade, to be educated. So it was a diverse and dynamic community that we get to dig into in the place where it actually happened. So when I joined CW, my charge was to extend our mission to the many millions of people who can never physically come to Williamsburg, Virginia, which is kind of off the beaten path in Tidewater, Virginia. You should all come. It's well worth the visit. But you kind of have to mean it. You have to go there on purpose. So no matter what we do, all of the people in America will not come. So we are laser focused on how we bring the power of our mission, which is simply that the future may learn from the past, to hundreds of millions of people across America and across the world. We, in my time at CW, have, and I'm getting to the question now, have invested in 3 discrete and distinct audience studies. Because like I said with WAMS worked because teachers asked for it. So we invested a fair amount of resources in audience research to understand. The first was about the general public coming to museums. What do people want and need out of a history museum experience? The second was a digital audience study. So what do people do online? How do they want to engage with history online? And the third was specifically about teachers. We did novel national research with 1,000 teachers all across the country in all kinds of communities and all grade levels to find out, and this was in 2023, what is it like to be a social studies teacher in 2023, in post-pandemic America, in the politically polarized climate we continue to live in? What are your biggest problems and how can we help solve them? So lots of really interesting findings from all of those bodies of research. And from that first set of research that we did, one of the things that we learned is that across the political spectrum, Americans say they care deep, number one, that they care deeply that an accurate portrayal of American history is shared in the mainstream. And number two, right under that, that they are worried about how US history is being taught in our classrooms. So people want it to be accurate, and also there's a distrust. People also reported, again, across the political spectrum, that our understanding of history can change. History is allowed to change when new facts are uncovered. And that is the power of place. We work in places where things actually happened. At Colonial Williamsburg, at Mount Vernon, we have active archaeology programs. We're literally taking things out of the ground. We are literally uncovering facts. And then saying, here, look, this is what happened. We pulled this out of the dirt. Brief aside, we're building an archaeology center, and when they broke ground on it and started to dig the foundation, they uncovered an archaeological site. And so we had to stop construction, and now it's delayed the whole thing. Anyway. So, the point of the story is how we can best empower educators in this time is to provide them with the actual stuff of history. And that stuff lives in museums and in historic sites. The other thing that's so important about this that I think about when I think about museums and our role in this work, be it video-based PD or other digital platforms, is we live in a time not only of political polarization, but eroded and eroding public trust in institutions across the board. The one institution that still enjoys very high levels of public trust is museums. We did it!
That's all because of us.
Listen, it's legitimately very hard work to maintain trust. The women in power will handle it, don't worry.
Remember the ladies.
Remember the ladies. There are actually a couple of studies about this that are not our studies, but one that the American Historical Association did showed that 90% of Americans trust U.S. history museums. Only 70% trust U.S. history teachers. So we can lend our trust to the teachers by providing them with high-quality video-based professional development that deepens their content knowledge, and in so doing deepens their confidence in the work that they're meant to do, which is imbue their students with not just historical knowledge, but historical empathy and civic understanding and empowerment. One of the ways that we're doing this is, in addition to ClassBark, we are building a new platform called history.org. I can give you a button after if you want some swag. I'll tell this story and then I'll stop. So Colonial Williamsburg owns the domain history.org. What? Smart people in the 90s. Colonial Williamsburg's 100 years old. So when I got there 3.5 years ago, I didn't know that when I accepted the job, and then I found out not only does Colonial Williamsburg own the domain, but we weren't using it. Which is, yeah, I know, right? That's the correct response. But Colonial Williamsburg's folly is our collective gain. Because what we have embarked on with history.org, with the people on this stage and some others in the room, is to build what we're sort of calling a digital front door to America's museums for K-12 teachers and students. So we're working with a consortium that is now at 48 museums and civic education organizations to bring together the best, the most exciting, the most dynamic stuff that all of us keep in our institutions, often behind glass or even worse, in closed storage where nobody can even see it anyway. Bring it together on this platform, build curricular and instructional wraparounds for each to help teachers not just teach with primary sources, but empower their students to study history the way historians do it, which is by analyzing and interrogating primary sources and developing those critical thinking skills so they can reach their own conclusions. And that is a big part of the key to all of this. We often say at Colonial Williamsburg, we will give you all the facts, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We won't tell you how to think about them. That is up to you. We pull this thing out of the ground, we will present it to you. We will invite you to bring it into conversation with other things that you see, the people around you, our interpreters, but we will not tell you how to think. And if we can continue to ground our work in those primary sources that shout the truth of American history, they shout it. That's how we can continue to empower our K-12 system to provide a way to engage with our collective past that is relevant for all of our learners. Now I'll stop.
Can we get an amen? One of the things that on our side, working as a media company with these museums, is that we felt it was incredibly important to be in the place with the experts, because that seemed to be the answer to what was going on politically, pedagogically, and so forth within school districts, and what we were hearing from teachers. As a recovering middle school assistant principal and principal, myself, what I found was a lot of younger teachers coming in who were being placed into positions where they hadn't had as much instructional or content background. And they weren't happy and they were looking for it. Where can I find it? And so what we're trying to do at ClassBark is bridge some of that gap between museums and teachers and their ability to reach that. And so that's what this little ClassBark project that we've been working on is. And I'm gonna do one lightning question for everybody to answer. It's gonna be one sentence or two. And then we're gonna ask you guys get to ask them questions. And I'm gonna ask you, what is something you learned from this process, or something you're proud of from this process? I have my thoughts too.
I'll start. One of the things, so this was the first time that our team has jumped into such a process. And typically when you come for an experience at a museum, you can go on an hour-and-a-half long tour. Of course, we've got the documents and we've got lesson plans, and then we were like, how do we condense the story of this experience into something that is accessible, that is engaging, but also has a really great depth and teeth. And I was really proud that we were able to condense it down, make it attractive, it looks incredible, go through the process of codifying, right? So we also had in addition to the scholars that were built into the process, we also engaged our own independent scholar, we had teachers review it, we had the Park Service review it. So we were able to do all of that, so we were able to hand over this process, knowing that it fit what we wanted to deliver to the public.
I'll go. It's very important when teachers experience our professional development programming that we are modeling best practices, not only in history education, but the type of place-based education we're all about. And I do think that comes through in the video. It's not just content. It was equally important to us to focus on methodology, whether that's closed reading of a document, and ClickView, ClassSpark did a great job of visualizing that, because of course those scaffolding tools are extremely helpful for everyone, not just our students or struggling students. And really being able to focus on a diverse variety of those primary sources. We got in documents, we got in objects, we got in place, in addition to the really robust content we were able to dive into. So I love that.
Excuse me. I think one of the things that's great about the ClassSpark videos across the board, including of course ours, is it's place-based, it's power of place. That's the name of our fundraising campaign, so it's kind of funny, power of place. But I think there's also a lot of power, as we were saying, in the experts, and it feels personal. It feels like you get to know these folks who are who you're learning with on the journey, and I think that's something new, and I'm really proud of that.
Okay, so I got to work on all of them, so I get to reflect as a media person now, and like I said, a recovering administrator. Mount Vernon, they brought out the good stuff from the artifacts. We got to see his inauguration code. We got to see the china that they used in Philadelphia. And the cool thing for me was I got to ask, who do you think ate off of this china? Those kinds of questions for kids, that's fascinating. And at Ford's, we dove into the conspiracy behind it and who these people were. And the producers kept calling it a murder board, and I kept saying, that's so, do that, but it was like how all the connections were made and how everybody knew everybody else. And Colonial Williamsburg, we've been working with you guys for so long, but I am just blown away with their interpreters. So they're absolutely amazing in the depth and the information that they know. So I'm gonna turn it over to you guys. What questions do you have? There's a microphone right there. I know you can do it.
We're teachers, we'll wait.
Or perform, either one. You don't want the performance.
Sorry, allergies are a little messed up, so I'm having a tough time talking, but one of the things that I found interesting was that you said people really trust museums. And I can see where that sentiment really comes in. I was curious about how the political moment of things being removed from museums is impacting that, and how is that actually showing up at your particular museums?
I'll take a crack at it. I think also being a private nonprofit, thankfully, we have more control of what we're doing and how we're doing it. You know, it's not lost on us that some of the decision makers are not, actually most of the decision makers are not educators or historians. And as one of our GWTI scholars, Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries likes to share, you know, people don't necessarily love history, they love nostalgia. And we are, I think that's really powerful. Like, we are actively trying to combat that, to present the facts, the stuff, for interpretation, yes, which could go many different ways, but in the hopes that teachers, the frontline soldiers, who are leading the future citizens, and that's civic work, will take those risks despite all the decision makers who don't know what they're doing. So we are a little sheltered from that, but we're very aware we're having those conversations daily.
I think one of the important points that Mia stated earlier in terms of what we all have to offer in terms of the primary sources, the evidence, and then allowing people to make their own decisions is really, really, really important. And then as you just mentioned, Alyssa, in terms of interpretation can take many formats, right? That is the power of storytelling and how individual that can be. And I think that's a power that we're trying to activate in terms of students themselves, and the critical thinking part of it is pointing back to the primary source in order to substantiate what the story is. So in terms of the things that are at Ford's Theater, like I said before, if you've come to, raise your hand if you've been to Ford's Theater in the past. Hey, hey, awesome, back to So on 10th Street, so if you go to the historic site, underneath the historic site is the museum, and then of course the theater is upstairs. You cross over, there's the Peterson House, and then we continue with exhibits on our side as well, where we have, of course, full agency. We have not had anything removed from our site. I think there has been, because that part is the government part of it, there has been an evaluation of some of the language, and I can happily share that if anything has been changed, it's been minimal. Where there has been some other adjustments made is with some of the titles that are in the specific bookstore that is run by the government. So that is where most of the adjustments have been. So we are also somewhat protected in that respect.
I'll just add, Colonial Williamsburg is also a private institution, so we benefit in the same way. Well, actually, two things I'll say really quickly about that. Museums retain high levels of public trust because we do very carefully steward it. It's not an accident, we are super mindful, and that's true of every institution I know of, museum. And a little example of that at Colonial Williamsburg, we recently discovered, relocated, restored, and reopened the Williamsburg Bray School, which is the oldest known building that was for the education of free and enslaved Black children. So we had the ribbon cutting on Juneteenth of this past year, and we had on site live broadcast news coverage from Newsmax and a front page story from the New York Times, both of which were positive. So to me, that's just evidence that when we approach history with appropriate nuance, and we ground it in the things and the place across the political spectrum, people appreciate and value that. Your question is a very good one. I kind of take a little comfort from the public outcry that we're seeing to these things that have happened. And I think that speaks to the public's value in museums and cultural institutions as spaces where we do dig into the truth of the past.
So that was what we were discussing. So is there any other question from anybody else? Okay, we can take one more, unless you guys do rapid.
So I was at the Austin Capitol building, and statue there, and I was reading the inscription on it, and talked a lot about states' rights, and no mention of slavery about the Civil War. Thought that was kind of curious. So I was just wondering, like, do you guys, what's your guys' like personal thoughts on like the level of knowledge about like, in the younger generation, or even just people in general, about like the real history of America and like what the Civil War was actually about? Because I feel like you go to a Confederate monument and there's literally zero mention of slavery. It's kind of interesting and a little bit weird.
Well, if you take the Ford's Theater course, there's going to be a whole section on memorials, and there's a whole history, and we had Richmond as an example of all the statues that were taken down in Richmond, and so forth. But yeah, I think that's fairly an interesting topic for people to look at. What do we memorialize and why? And where is it there, and when did it happen? That's the key part of that. Okay, there were two more, so let's do them real quick so I don't get in trouble with the folks here. And then we're going to end with inspiration from Williamsburg.
Hello, I'm Keisha. I'm a game designer, and I came here because I had an opportunity to work on a game that was trying to transform people and educate people about gentrification within Pittsburgh. And some of the challenges we faced in the development was like, how do we tell this story without letting our perspective or our narrative bleed into it, and also like not. So my question is, you guys touched upon, you said something about analyzing the primary sources and interpreting your own story, which is very powerful, I think. So I'm wondering if you guys have any anecdotes, any specific stories where you face the challenge of the design challenge of condensing a story and presenting it in the most accessible way possible without forming the narrative for the consumer. Does that make sense?
It does. Just as quickly as possible. I think the best practice education methodologies that we use help us accomplish the thinking that maybe someone or a student or a teacher in their PD would need to do to kind of unpack their interpretation. So we do a lot of modeling of the type of thinking, like, I know we're conscious.
Well, I'm just going to speak for all three of them. They don't shy away from the facts. So when we were working with them, for example, one of the units in the George Washington piece is about when he was president in Philadelphia. And it talks to the fact that he had enslaved, but if you remember, Pennsylvania slowly got rid of slavery, but he worked around it. And we talk about it. So it's a historical fact. So
I'll just add really quick. I know for all of our institutions with ClassSpark and then with History.org, everything that goes on History.org is reviewed like literally 10 times by multiple historians, multiple teachers, curators, the institution whose thing it is, and Colonial Williamsburg. So it's a very, very, very rigorous review process to ensure historical accuracy, ensure nonpartisanship, ensure appropriate nuance, and that it's not like Mia wrote this paragraph and so it reflects what Mia thinks about this thing. And that, frankly, is the slowest and most expensive part of the project, but it's something we won't compromise on.
I'll just add on to that. I think a narrative is story and story is narrative. So that's what we're also teaching students to evaluate when they're reading a primary source or secondary, is who was the author of it and from what lens are they sharing the story. So you can't avoid it.
Yeah.
But what you can track is, does the understanding that we have all achieved at the end, is it supported by that? Or does it take any kind of journey off to the side because of any agenda or perspective? So as long as that end conclusion is there, and it feels like it's tracked, I think we're fine. And I just quickly want to address really quickly your question. I think one of the things that, in terms of memorials and monuments, thank you. One of the things that we're asking people to come into is an openness, we hope, to learning something or encountering something that may shift one's understanding, right? So we can't help what experiences or exposures people have, but we can say once you come in here and you take in the information, hopefully it has expanded the worldview, and that's all that we can do from presenting what we have.
I can't thank these three ladies enough on multiple levels, working with them over time and what they developed. But we will leave you with a little advice.
As we close, on advice to my country, I'll ask again, where do you see yourself in history? What will you do to make history in your life, your classroom, and your republic?